I'm Cheyenne Hollis, Dot Property Group Editor-in-Chief, and today we're going to be looking at leasehold property in Thailand. Most people are probably aware of purchasing a condominium here in the kingdom via a freehold agreement, which essentially states you get to hold on to that property for eternity. A leasehold agreement, on the other hand, states that you only own a property for a set number of years, usually 30 with extensions tacked onto that agreement. For many buyers, they are quite wary of the leasehold scenario because they don't like the fact that they'll eventually have to return that property. But in some cases, it does make sense to acquire a leasehold property. Now, today, we're going to look at some of the things you should know about before buying a property on a leasehold agreement. There are two scenarios when you may find yourself needing to purchase a property via a leasehold arrangement. The first is when it comes to landed properties, houses, villas, residences of that nature. In Thailand, it is illegal for an international buyer to own a house or a villa or land via a freehold agreement. In that case, you will need to buy using the leasehold mechanism. The second time you may find yourself interested in acquiring a leasehold property is when it comes to certain condominium buildings where the foreign ownership quota has already been sold out. In some cases, developers, if they have a development or condominium that is popular with foreign buyers, but they have sold that quota to foreigners already, they will convert the remainder of the building into leasehold units. So in places like Patio or Phuket, where condominiums in specific locations may be popular with overseas buyers, you may only have the opportunity to purchase certain units via a leasehold agreement because there are no longer any freehold units available. Before purchasing a property via a leasehold arrangement in Thailand, there are three things that you're really going to want to consider from a legal standpoint. The first legal issue that you're going to need to consider is when it comes to lease terms. The standard leasehold term in Thailand is 30 years. Now, it is possible to get two more 30-year extensions for a grand total of 90 years. That's it. Anyone who's trying to tell you that there are any other mechanisms or any other lengths are not being entirely honest with you. Now, from a legal standpoint, you'll see a lot of developers offering up the full 90. They will say, we will give you this property on lease for 90 years. And while in theory that may work, the reality is that they can only really promise the 30-year term that the lease is agreed to. Any other future extensions will need to be agreed on at a later date. You cannot agree to an extension before it becomes due. This is really important to note, because there is a chance that land gets transferred to a different owner or a scenario like that happening. And when that does happen, you will have to renegotiate the extension when it comes due at the expiry of the 30 years. Now, if that does happen and the land is transferred, you as a leasehold owner still have rights to that. They can't take it before the 30-year lease has expired. But you're not guaranteed that extension, and any developer promising you that 90 years isn't really being fully honest with what they can promise, or they're giving you something that they may not necessarily be able to deliver. The second legal aspect of buying leasehold property we're going to look at today is when it comes to guaranteed buyback clauses. We're seeing a lot more properties in Thailand, or a lot more leasehold properties that is, in Thailand, where the developer is offering a guaranteed buyback, or that they will reacquire the unit from you for an agreed upon price. This sounds great, and it is a interesting sort of incentive for many buyers wary of the leasehold agreement. However, much like the leasehold extension terms, this isn't quite as legal as you would believe it to be. I spoke to a property expert at Siam Legal who sort of went over this with me, and essentially any guaranteed buyback clause inserted into a contract can't be legally enforced. It is more of a gentleman's agreement. So what does that mean for you? Well, you shouldn't necessarily be turned off by the thought of it, However, you're going to want to make sure the developer who has inserted that guarantee buyback clause into your agreement is liquid. They have a means to earn future revenue when it is time for the guarantee buyback to kick in. So when you are agreeing to that contract, make sure you know that guaranteed buyback is not a legally enforceable clause. It's more of a gentleman's agreement, and that you may find yourself in a troubling scenario down the line if there is issues with the developer. Now, I understand that those last 2 points may have made leasehold agreements seem to be an unsavory or an undesirable mechanism for property ownership in Thailand. But there is benefits to leasehold ownership, especially if you want to buy a house or a villa. In many cases, you are left with worse options if you decide to go another route. There are really two other main routes to buy a villa or a house or even a condominium unit in a certain area or a certain type of building. So, the first one is purchasing a house or villa or landed property via a Thai registered business. This means that essentially the business has to be operating forever, and it has to be a company that's bringing in revenue. You can't buy a dormant company. You can't buy a property through a dormant company and then hope the government just turns the other way. The Thai government does regularly look into businesses to see if they're operating, if they're essentially front for a property purchase. So it's strongly advised that you don't buy a landed property through a Thai licensed business unless you actually plan on operating that business and will have full control of it, will maintain a full stake in it, essentially however long you plan on owning the property. Now, the second issue would be buying a property with a Thai partner, a wife or a husband, a spouse, whatever you may have. This one, and you will probably find it on online forums, and you will just find that these partnerships, if they dissolve, getting that property back becomes a nightmare, especially if it's in the name of a Thai owner. In some cases, you will need to convert that into a leasehold agreement anyway, because if a foreigner can't own a landed property, you're not going to convert that ownership because it was held by your Thai partner. Again, it just creates a very messy scenario where a leasehold, you actually have legal rights, you have ways to proceed, and that, again, it's just strongly advised that if you are going to buy a villa or you're going to buy any sort of house or landed property, that you do it through a leasehold mechanism as opposed to a more riskier scenario that can arise either via a Thai company or purchasing it through a partner. At the end of the day, it's really just about buying the property you really want. If you have your heart set on a villa, then you use the leasehold agreement because you do have legal protections there. You know you're going to get that property for a set amount of time. And it's even possible to see appreciation should you decide to sell it on, or maybe you do get that extension later on. I think the really key thing here is just make sure you can find a trustworthy developer who will deliver on all of their promises and that who are financially viable and financially stable. If you find a developer who have those traits and hopefully a track record of success, you're really making a smart move going a leasehold purchase as opposed to some of the other more nebulous or tricky measures, like your Thai limited companies. Anyway, no matter what you're looking for in Thailand when it comes to real estate, don't forget to visit thailandproperty.com. I'm Cheyenne Hollis, Property Editor, coming to you live from Bangkok, and we will see you again next time.